What did Jawaharlal Nehru really think of Indian civilization? Was he disconnected from India's cultural heritage? What were his views on caste, on Islam, on Hinduism? And why did he so rarely use the word secularism? You may have encountered confident answers to these questions in countless WhatsApp forwards. But Nehru, unlike most political figures, left behind something far more valuable than opinions about him, his own words. India's first Prime Minister and one of the principal founders of the modern republic produced an extraordinary body of work, letters, speeches, essays, and reflections on history, culture, civilization, modernity, governance, society, science, rationality, and much else besides. Much of this material is now available online in a searchable format for anyone willing to engage with Nehru directly rather than through caricature. My guest today on terms of engagement is someone uniquely placed to guide us through this intellectual archive. Professor Madhavan Palat, former professor of history at Jawaharlal Nehru University, long-time editor of the collected works of Jawaharlal Nehru, and currently editor of Nehru Archives. Right. Thank you, Professor Madhavan K. Palat. Professor Palat is now the editor of the Nehru Archives. Before that, he was the editor of the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru. And prior to that, he was a professor of history at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He is our guest today for this latest episode of Terms of Engagement, a series that discuss ideas and principles and practices that keep us as a country, as a nation. Today, what we are going to discuss is a phenomenal project that you've been helming, which is archiving on the digital platform the entire work of Jawaharlal Nehru, if I'm getting it correctly. I've read it is 75,000 pages of material. Can you just tell me how did you manage? Did you read all the 75,000 pages, or how did you?
Let me say, thank you very much for calling me, and I'm very interested to participate in this. Yeah, to answer your question, there are 100 volumes of the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru, of which I've edited 42. So those 42, of course, I've read extremely closely, each article or item at least about 3 times as in the course of editing. The rest I have read in the course of my studies about Nehru. So I've pretty nearly read all the 100. I would have obviously missed out certain items, and I'd know some parts better than the others. But yes, that's it. I am extremely familiar with Nehru. To the extent I can say, Nehru was my best friend for 8 years while I was editing him, because I could almost see how he thought. I could trace his ideas, and how he would react to any situation I could very well understand. It is as if I was sitting at his shoulder and watching him draft his speeches and letters and so on, because I've seen the process as he went through it all. I was in extremely close communication with Nehru as a result, which is a wonderful experience. And of course, the experience of it is that you see how India was ruled from the seat of the Prime Minister. That is the advantage of...
That's a vantage point of all these communications.
Seeing it all. You read everything, and you see exactly what he was doing, how he was dealing with each chief minister, each foreign head of state, each agitation, etc., etc.
So he was acutely conscious of the fact that history was being made as he was dealing with these things. So he's keeping nearly minute record of all that is happening.
He was very conscious of that. He kept excellent records. He was careful about it. And as a result, we have pretty nearly everything about Nehru available. Some of it is not available simply because of the official secrets position. And certain ministries are sensitive, like Defense, Foreign Affairs, and Home. So those are still lying in those respective ministries. But a huge amount was left behind in his house as office copies of his correspondence and the things he received. That is our source, primarily. And when the project was started by Dr. Gopal, Radhakrishnan's son,
S. Gopal, who was also
S.
professor
Gopal.
at JNU.
Yeah, who was professor at JNU and has written the 3-volume biography. Dr. Gopal set up the whole project of publishing it. And with the support of Indira Gandhi, he got through to a large number of ministries and their archives and got lots of valuable documents, which have been used in this publication. And that is a secondary archive. The primary archive is what is in the house when he died. And the secondary archive is that which is collected in the course of this. They are both in the Prime Minister's Museum now, library. And we have used it all over all these years. How did I go about it? Well, I came in at rather late, only in 2011. But the project had been going a bit slow because of a series of editors having, Dr. Gopal died, and then other editors came and went. And then they asked me, and I actually happened to be the first full-time editor.
Right.
Yeah.
And you nearly did half of the 100. You did 40 plus.
42.
42, yeah.
To be precise.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nearly half.
Right.
And one of the things I did is I was, being a historian, and the others were also historians, but I said, whatever happens, we have to have the original documents. So speeches, for example, earlier on they were translated into English. I said, no, the original is Hindi, if he spoke in Hindi. Therefore, we have to put it out in Hindi. And my joke was that you needed a South Indian to publish all the Hindi speeches.
Right. Okay.
That was a sort of standing joke there. But anyway, we did it. And that is exactly what we are going to continue doing. Now that we've gone online, we'll get all the earlier speeches which we haven't published in Hindi, we'll put it all on. So that we have a complete record of the speeches as he spoke it, not as it is translated. We'll have the translations also to make it easily accessible to others who may not find Hindi easy.
So, Professor, before we get into tackling some of the ideas that Nehru represented and articulated, as an introduction to this massive resource, repository of resources that have come online right now, or now available online, how would a person who is interested in Jawaharlal Nehru be able to use the Nehru archives to understand Nehru? If you could tell us that.
Well, if anybody wants to understand him, you must have certain questions in mind.
Right.
That's the normal way you'd go about research. This is not like reading a storybook. You don't start at page 1 and go to the last. Not with 75,000 pages. Right. So what is the question in mind? And then, because the archive has now the search function, you can just search. A simple entry of the question you have, or the keywords, will take you to all those documents easily, effortlessly. So now it opens up an immense area of research very easily to anyone, anywhere in the world. And most importantly, to anyone in India. Otherwise, there's no use having the archives in Delhi. When so many people, even in Delhi, cannot come. At least I never used to have the time to go and sit in the archive and do it. You need it at home so that you can work at any time. And this eliminates the entire problem of going into a library and working there. And we've made it free access. No registration, no paywall, none of those problems. And you can download also, so that everyone can get it effortlessly. I don't know why people insist on having paywalls and so on. It's not much money you make out of it. But all you do is to restrict people from using it. Well, we decided that should not happen, and therefore it's accessible. So the way one would normally approach it, if you want to understand Nehru, I suppose anybody would want to know what his central ideas were, what his central concerns were, what were driving him throughout his life. And that you'd pick up one by one. And as I've suggested earlier, and it's evident from his work, he was deeply interested in history. Now, why was he so interested in history as to write 4 full books on the subject? In fact, his only published work is in history.
Right.
The others are just compilations.
Yeah, so we will come to some of those specifics.
Yeah.
But before we get there, despite the fact that Nehru is somebody who really took the effort to explain, to clarify, to communicate, and left 75,000 words as of now that we've collected and put out, still he remains one of the most misrepresented, misunderstood character in Indian history. Perhaps because both his admirers and his detractors have their own ideas that they project onto Nehru. Is that why he's... Would you actually agree with my suggestion that he is perhaps misunderstood or misrepresented?
He's misrepresented, certainly. But this is the fate of all major leaders. They have to be rescued from their admirers as well as from their detractors. The famous expression, Marx at the end of his life said, "I'm not a Marxist."
Yes.
This is the fate of everybody. So again and again, it has happened. We can take up any issue of Nehru. Was he a perfect Democrat? Yes. But he despised so many Democrats because he felt that electoral democracy brought out the worst in man. Now, this is an example of a pure-blooded Democrat who was so disillusioned always with the actual workings of democracy. It is something like he endorsed the development of capitalism in India. He wanted it to happen, of course, alongside of socialism. But the capitalism always brings up the worst in human beings. It's greed, accumulation, stamping on others, climbing over others, cheating, etc. This has again and again been represented throughout the people who have made critiques of capitalism. It is revolutionary. It brings so much progress, but brings out the worst type of human being also, not the best. This is what he found with electoral democracy, for example. So he's a Democrat who saw through it, and he was always trying to contain the problems that it would generate. Similarly, he was a great nationalist, undoubtedly. But he was an internationalist at the same time who saw the limitations of nationalism. So he was not a crude nationalist, however much people might suggest it one way or the other. He was not dogmatic about it. And he was supportive, finally, of a regional nationalism and the linguistic states of India and their respective nationalisms. He first feared that it might lead to what is called vociferous tendencies in those days. And then he saw, far from doing that, it actually united the country better because it allowed democracy to penetrate deeper through that. And for that very reason, he was so keen on the panchayats.
So, one particular aspect about Nehru is deeply polarizing in contemporary India, which is his attitude towards Indian heritage, Indian civilization, whereas he actually does say a lot and write a lot about Vedas and Upanishads and other things. How did that idea about Nehru, that he somehow was dismissive of Indian heritage, come about? Is it because both his detractors and his admirers seem to agree on that point?
Yeah. Very much so. You see, in the anxiety to... first of all, Nehru's position was that religion is fine, admirable, and brings out very important aspects of the human personality. And it is an important aspect of our lives also. But he opposed the idea of organized religion, the dogmas of religion, and a priesthood. This is what he opposed. But if religion consisted of total commitment to a great cause, which is how he always saw it, then he said that's just about the best. And he actually admitted if religion was so important for so many centuries throughout human history, it obviously is a very important, plays a very important function. And his attraction to Buddhism was very well known, indeed. So he had a feeling or an understanding of religious feeling. He was not hostile to it. What he was hostile to was dogma, priesthood, and organization. This is what he opposed, not the rest of it. And Gandhi's type of religious feeling, for example, he fully endorsed. He admired Jesus Christ, Muhammad, Buddha. These are all the great people he admired very much. So when people represent him as a secular person, they've always said that he had nothing to do with religion. That's not true. And those who say that he's secular and despised religion and therefore Indian heritage are even more untrue.
Those who say he is anti-Hindu, he was anti-Hindu.
Not at all, not in the least. He just said every religion has its own place, and religion is not going to dominate our lives. It is your choice. What religion you want, what level of the religion you want to adhere to, and you can have as much freedom as you want through your religion, as long as everybody else also has that. In other words, he adhered to the fundamental principles of human rights, of freedom of conscience. Everybody can pursue any idea as long as it does not infringe upon another's pursuit of the same ideas, of their ideas. That's all. Therefore, religion comes in within that. You're free to do so. And you might dispute with somebody about their ideas of the doctrine and so on. But his freedom to dispute doesn't mean he wished to suppress it or denigrate it. He didn't even do that. What he did denigrate is dogmatism at all points. And that he objected to. And any coercion associated with it through organized religion, that also. But otherwise, as for heritage, he's the one who talked about 5,000 years of Indian civilization. His most famous speech in the Constituent Assembly, when he said, the past is looking down upon us as we live in this present and build our future. He was so conscious of the past. He was Burkean in his conservatism, in a sense. So anything but that. What they assume is that because he was opposed to doctrine and dogma, therefore he's opposed to Hinduism. No. Is it? Let everybody do what they wish. And like everybody, he chose from the entire past those aspects of civilization which he thought could be used most profitably to develop the future. That's what everybody does. So he rejected certain parts of it. He found caste negative and rejected it. Many doctrines he rejected. All these he did. But for other things, his account of the Vedas are so positive in the discovery. He's pagan. That's what he really is. He said the sheer affirmation of life in the Vedas, their absorption and their enjoyment of life, and the earthiness of it, or the worship of the elements and so on, gives it such a vibrant air. It is something to be enjoyed and admired. The philosophy of the Upanishads, he gave it the very highest marks. Of Buddhism, of course, and so on. And if you read the discovery of India, you'd be surprised people don't seem to realize this. If I remember my count right, he had 143 pages on ancient India. That is to say, most of it was Hinduism and Buddhism. He didn't write about politics. And only about 53 pages on medieval India. Everyone says he was so enamored of Islam. I think he was quite ignorant of Islam, actually. He didn't bother to study it properly. What he did see as very positive in medieval times is what he imagined to be the fusion between Hindu and Islamic practices through Sufi and Hindu mystical movements, where Kabir stands out as such an important figure. Now, that is what he upheld. And a man like Akbar, who tried some kind of what is interpreted as a fusion. I don't think it's historically accurate, But anyway, it is seen that way, and therefore tolerant. So he then cast the whole of Indian tradition as being tolerant. That is his word for secularism, a word he never used very much.
Yeah, so that is so so in the 75,000 words, sorry, the pages that are there,
Yeah.
It is sparsely used. The word secularism, which is actually been a very controversial term for whatever reason as of today.
It was after his life that the word became a sort of slogan, representing a certain government policy or Congress policy and so on, and progressive policy. He took it for granted that this is going to be a secular society. And at the time of the framing of the Constitution, he was asked, why haven't you introduced the word secularism? He said, we don't need to. He said he didn't want a word like secularism or of socialism. He said they tend to be red rags for certain set type of people, because they imagine all sorts of things. When you say secular, they imagine you're going to destroy their religion. And if you're socialist, they imagine you're going to destroy their livelihood. Completely wrong, but people imagine all that and get very anxious. So he said, we don't want that. We want to unify people around this constitution to create a united India. He never wanted to divide people. He saw himself as revolutionary, but at the same time one who would not divide. So it was a pretty tough combination. Revolutionaries divide always.
Right. Polarize.
Polarize.
Yeah.
That's their basis. Lenin is a classic example.
Yeah.
He was the very opposite. He wanted to build consensus, like Gandhi. He learned it all from Gandhi. Though he did periodically break ranks. He was very militant about it sometimes. But he finally came back to Gandhi's position always. So he said, we don't have to say secular because the whole constitution is based upon the assumption that this is going to be secular.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. And his word for it was tolerance. And he said tolerance was essential to Indian civilization, not Hindu, to Indian civilization, in which he included, of course, the Hindu. So he says, there's no doubt about it. We're always tolerant, always absorptive. We could manage a vast amount of diversity, and yet it is a single civilization you can think of. So if he is a person who thought of 5,000 years of civilization, who spoke so highly of what everybody thinks is Hinduism, but he didn't speak of it as Hinduism so much as Indian culture. This is the important part, because it included Buddhism in it.
Right.
And our important patrimony, which fused with everything that came later, Islam and so on. How can he be considered to be opposed or indifferent to heritage, or a person who did not understand heritage? He always spoke of the great importance of heritage, but he says we must not live in the past. This is the point he always made.
So he himself is evolving over his own lifetime.
Yeah.
So the Nehru that we can discover in these pages of his own writing, so when do we begin to get a glimpse of what he is, and then how long does it go on?
Well, I would say that we get a clear definition of Nehru from the mid-1920s, especially when he went to Europe for the Brussels Anti-Imperialism Congress and met all the socialists of the world at that time and defined his position as socialist. And from that time onwards, he never had any doubt about it. The point is what kind of socialism, how to nuance it, and how to relate to the other forms of socialism in the world. The Soviet version, the European social democratic version. And what is the socialism in India going to be? And he defined his position there, and that at least continued throughout his life. Number one, Soviet socialism, which is called communism, he said, we are not going to accept it because it is too dogmatic, too dominated by a party. It is dictatorial. He wrote it all in that little pamphlet about Soviet Union, which he published in 1928. So, and they always tried to boss us. He said, more or less he was saying, we are not overthrowing the domination of the British to replace it with the domination of the Soviet Union. But what is good about them, or what is attractive about them, was what they had achieved in the Soviet Union, which is universal literacy in certain important areas, considering the backwardness of Russia at that time. And that was a great achievement, which is accepted by all historians. You don't have to be a propagandist of the Soviet Union. Secondly, its rapid industrialization. This was what fascinated him. Mm-hmm. How did the Soviet Union industrialize?
We'll get to that. So from 1920s to mid-1960s, we have a continuous panoramic view of how Nehru as an intellectual, as a leader, as a thinker is evolving.
Yes.
And he's not staying static. He is evolving over the period.
Not at all. Because as I said, in his one thing was his position about the Soviet Union, is being critical of it. Not only that they dominated, but they were extremely oppressive. As he said, they followed a number of wrong policies. That's the words he used, meaning Stalin's. But he also found that the European socialists were much too comfortable with imperialism. So he's not going to be one with them either. So Indian socialism has to be independent of both forms of socialism. And that is his position. That is, it is going to be independent. It might align itself with both at different times. However, in the late 30s, when European liberalism seemed to collapse under the fascist onslaught, and the whole of Europe was going fascist, and the last remaining liberal states in Europe, namely Britain, France, were playing footsie with the fascists so much as to allow the rise of Hitler, allow what they did in Spain, allow Italy to invade Abyssinia, Ethiopia, with all its atrocities. That is the time when he called himself a communist. He used words like, I believe in communism, there is a communist civilization or Soviet civilization, etc., after what Beatrice Webb had written about the Soviet Union, things like that. Of course, he wasn't communist, but it was a moment of despair at that time, in the late 30s. But thereafter, he reminded people again and again that the Soviet method is not for us. There are enormous costs. But Western socialists are not necessarily our best pals. They are too much hand in glove with the imperialist system. So it won't do either.
So he's responding to the changing global situation, of course, on that question. And also domestic issues also, depending on how Indian society and politics is evolving, he is also fine-tuning his own approach to many of these things, questions of language, religion, the regional aspiration.
Especially that.
All those aspects he is evolving. He's not quite the dogmatic that his own admirers would want to project him as.
See, for example, until the 1940s, until the partition, he fully endorsed the Congress position on the linguistic states.
Which
had been prepared in 1920 already at the Nagpur Congress, that the Congress would divide into a series of linguistic units, linguistic Pradesh committees, which was the basis of the later linguistic states, because they found mobilization worked better if you went around it through the linguistic regions. And he accepted that. He saw that that would be a good basis for mobilization indeed. And there was no doubt, the difficulty about it. But partition brought another aspect to it. He never expected partition should take place. And that was a trauma for everybody. But when he did, he saw the potency of separatist tendencies in the country. And there were, by then, certain other separatist tendencies, or seemed to be, the Dravidian one, for example. And then soon enough, what happened in Kashmir and the Northeast and so on. And after the partition experience, it is very difficult to automatically accept that this would not be repeated. He said, one thing we must make sure is there's not going to be another partition. And for that reason, he was initially opposed to the idea of any more linguistic states and that kind of division. And that is why he opposed the Andhra province being created and so on. But he accepted it because of a democratic demand. It had to come. And he is the one who steered the linguistic reorganization, despite his misgivings. He saw it through.
So you have at least two changes that are happening through his life, which is that initially he, along with other Congress leaders, accepted provincial Congress committees which were based on linguistic demarcation.
Yes.
And then partition was so traumatic for him that the whole emphasis was
It shifted
to shift
to more centralization.
to avoid another one, right?
Yes.
But later on, looking at the dynamics of the country, he said that accommodating those sentiments, particularly on the question of Hindi, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, so he is quite emphatic that Hindi has to have a national lingua franca status, but also in the same breath he's saying that, but there cannot be an imposition of any language including Hindi.
That's right.
That is a position that he maintains.
He maintained it throughout. He said, of course, promote Hindi, but do not impose it. Promote it by all means. We have to use English for international communication in any case, and we have to promote every regional language because that is what everybody is comfortable with. So his fundamental position was what we'd consider extremely appropriate. Promote the languages, not suppress another language and not impose one. But promoting one is one of the most difficult. How do you promote the enormous amount of academic and linguistic specialized effort that is required has not been carried out, neither then nor now, till now. How do you teach these languages? How do you actually make them the vehicles of communication in the modern world? They have to be able to carry the entire load of modern conceptual structures, which was obstructed over 130 years of colonial rule because English was made the official language. And to reverse that process is a very difficult position. It requires a lot of research and investment in teaching it and making it effective. Nobody's been able to bite that bullet, perhaps because it is too expensive. Everybody's gone in for what he himself did, higher education in science and technology, and that has done well. After a gestation period of 30, 40 years, it began to show results in the 80s, properly speaking, and 90s. Now it's doing so well. These things are possible if you invest in it. But nobody dared to invest. They didn't even invest in primary education. How do you teach a mixed class, multiple languages? The investment requires so many teachers are required to teach each of these languages. How do you do it? And how do you carry the full burden of all modern concepts in it? These are things to be worked out. And it cannot be worked out by having ridiculous concoctions of strange words from the classical languages. Might or might not work. You can, but it has to be taught, and taught properly without coercion. It is a political process which politicians have to, or political leaders have to understand. But they are keener to effect an imposition to gain votes than to carry it out as a major pedagogic exercise and even a philosophical one.
So, going back to the question about the anxiety or even fear that country could be divided again, and the obsession with avoiding that thing. So he continuously seems to identify three specific issues that can be divisive: communalism, regionalism, and casteism. I think that is a recurring theme in many of his speeches as Prime Minister.
Yes. He considered these are the most dangerous. Regionalism he called linguism, namely linguistic states and the chauvinism around it. He supported the linguistic state, but he's worried about the chauvinism around it, as with all nationalisms. Communalism, obviously, simply because of the experience of the partition, it showed what could happen. And casteism, because it was an accepted tenet at that time, that caste was somehow holding the development of the country back. It is backwardness. It is an indication of backwardness. And independently of that, he abhorred caste because of the inequality built into it. That he found oppressive. So an ideology which formally instituted inequality went against not only his grain, but against what the Constitution itself had established in the fundamental rights. So the caste was something that he found abhorrent on this ground. Now, handling each one of these turned out to be a very tricky matter. Regionalism was the one that was easiest in one way, because it was a miniaturized version of the Indian nation itself. In one region, you had India reproduced. So if it was a local nationalism, which was integrated to a larger nationalism, it worked well. It was a partnership. Everyone realized that being independent didn't help very much. The Dravidians also realized that fast enough. You gained much more by gaining control of the whole country, or at least a good slice of the country, than setting up independently, as Pakistan seems to have realized. Or I don't know if they have realized. They just became a client state of the United States. And Nepal's independence has not led to development, for example. And it's a strange thing to say that it would have been better for them to be part of India. Then they would have participated in all of India's development. On the other hand, of course, if you are already independent, it's better to remain independent. So that is one problem he certainly saw. Communalism is a much bigger challenge. How to handle it. And his position always was that religion is something that is to be private. Private means, or it can be publicly displayed. It's not meant to be private that you hide it. But it is your own. It is a choice you make. Even if you've inherited it, it's your choice. And if it's your choice, you do not impose your choice upon somebody else. That is a fundamental position. So everyone is free to have their own religion, and you do not impose it upon anybody else, and you do not restrict anybody else from enjoying it. That is a thing. And therefore, he equated religion with an ideology in that sense. You can be a socialist, doesn't mean you impose it on anybody else. You can any ideology you wish. Within the Constitution, within the fundamental rights, everything goes. That is okay. And the rest is all detail that has to be worked out by the political leadership.
Two follow-up questions on that. One, when he is referring to casteism, so casteism can be understood, the reference, the meaning of that word can be understood differently depending on how you see it. It can denote a hierarchical social order that is representing that, and practicing that is casteism. There is also, that word also carries a meaning that, okay, somebody who is mobilizing against that as a caste identity also is usually referred to as casteist. Yes, Ambedkar is called a casteist by many people. Yeah. So in Nehru's context, is he addressing both, or what actually?
Well, that's an important question. Yeah. He first saw it as caste as granting privileges to some and imposing exclusion on others. And the hierarchy it imposed, and the sheer injustice of it, and the inequality, he saw it as I already said, inequality and so on is bad in itself, not to be tolerated, and it violated the Constitution. But how is it to be opposed when it is so central to our lives in one way or the other? Even non-Hindus practice caste, and that is the irony of it. So, while he campaigned against caste in every way, he accepted one important qualification. After all, the scheduled castes were granted a position in the Constitution and reservation on it, on the principle that they needed to be assisted to get out of the ages or centuries long discrimination, and therefore it will be promoted. He, at the same time, had a fear that you're creating a vested interest in caste by doing so. And he tossed between the two. But he said, no. So great has been the injustice done, and it is so obnoxious, we have to do something to get out of this. But he never got beyond that. And it is only towards the end of his life, by the late 50s, he began to notice that caste is used actually a base of mobilization, political mobilization. It is no longer just an inheritance. It is actually a political force. It's a vehicle. And it can be used to assert yourself and to gain equality or overcome inequalities of various kinds. And it's a form of empowerment. You can use the caste for mobilization for that purpose. That is what he began to notice. But I think he never had time to think about it or deal with it exhaustively. All the big problems on that score came much later, after his life. And the whole Mandal question and so on came much later. In his own time, he never dealt with it, except as caste being negative, and therefore we must try to get out of it, and the scheduled caste must be helped to rise in social status and provided opportunities, and we must all overcome our prejudices and stop exclusions. That's what he hoped.
On the question of communalism, while he remains always critical of communalism, names communalism, most of his writing post-independence on communalism seems to be repeated references to Jansangh and the Hindu communalism he is particularly concerned about. Obviously, there is a lot of reference. He's very extremely frustrated with Jinnah and other things earlier. But does he shift to a position that after partition, majority communalism is more harmful or more detrimental than Muslim communalism?
He did. You see, everybody who faces these sort of situations, the majority is more dangerous always than the minority. Although it is the majority discourse that the minority is the danger. This always happens. You see it in anti-Semitism in Europe. The argument of the anti-Semites is that the Jews are a threat. How can they be a threat when they're such a small minority? So they have conspiracy theories. And the typically same conspiracy theories in India. And to shift the register, you go to the Soviet Union. Lenin considered Russian nationalism the greatest danger, greater danger than the other nationalisms. All the Bolshevik party thought that. Namely, the majority is more dangerous when it is pandering to an ideology of this nature, of an exclusivist nature. So it happens across the board in many parts of the world. And Nehru certainly did. He considered majority communalism more dangerous. Doesn't mean he ignored minority communalism. His entire opposition to the Punjabi Suba was based upon the fact, or his argument, that the Akalis were demanding it as a communal demand. Sikh communalism, he says, I will not accept. And throughout his life, he adamantly refused to have a Punjabi Suba. Immediately after he died, the state was created. And Muslim communalism, he had no illusions about. After all, he had spent so much time dealing with Jinnah and company. And he knew that Muslim, Hindu, Sikh communalisms all fed each other. And it was as bad. But the problem after 1947 was not Muslim communalism. In fact, the Muslims are the ones who took the brunt. And in India, they were now looked upon with such suspicion as the ones who were responsible for the partition. And he said, if you want to create a united country, then you have to be inclusive, not hold them suspect all the time. Only inclusive, but he did not pander to them. He said, make sure of equality at all stages. And make sure that they are fully participant in the politics of the country in every way. He's alive to it, that's true, that there would be Muslim communalism, but that was nowhere near the danger that Hindu communalism was.
So, on the question of Hindu identity, so you referred to his acceptance, I would say somewhat reluctantly, the idea of reservation for scheduled caste. He accepts that thing. Then there's also some debate about if a scheduled caste person converts to a different religion, including to Buddhism, whether they continue to. So he is very emphatic in the early decades that they should not, because the moment you cease to be a Hindu, by implication, you cease to be a scheduled caste.
Yeah.
So there, the idea of Hindu unity which Gandhi Ambedkar debate of the.
Yeah.
So Nehru subscribes to that, as in like if you're not Buddhist, Buddhist and Muslim and Christian, you by implication you are a Hindu.
Yes, more or less. That was left rather vague. He was not dogmatic about it. And the reason it is so vague is, as you know in the academic scholarship and the discussions around it, Hinduism is defined as whatever
is the residual.
That's right. It is a catch-all.
Yeah.
Are the tribal people Hindu?
Yeah.
Are the scheduled caste Hindu? Ambedkar said they're not Hindu. Yeah. Tribal people, can you call them Hindu? Doubtful. Yes and no. So depends from which position, how much each one has been Hinduized, and all those questions. But he did not want further fractures taking place by conversions and creating another religious controversy, another religious opposition, and demanding rights that come out of the Hindu caste system in a religion that does not have a caste system. So if they are seek to fight for their rights, then the right position from which to do so is from where they are. By going into another religion and doing so, invites a further source of friction and further communalism, in fact, one religion against another. So it is causing further social disharmony when you've already got too many of them. So what is the purpose then of converting? What is the benefit you get if you want all the benefits at the same time that of reservation within the Hindu fold? Of course, if you consider the caste as the scheduled caste is not Hindu, then of course their conversion is okay. But his point is that it is central to Hinduism to have had this scheduled caste. It comes out of Hinduism, Hindu logic, not from any other religion. Certainly not Buddhist or Islamic or Christian. So it is within Hinduism that you must deal with it, whichever way. And by simply saying that it is not Hindu and going into another religion and then creating a major religious confrontation would not be a solution.
So he pretty much echoes that sentiment in his views on conversion also. He is very emphatic about all people's right to practice their religion, individual choice, rights, and I mean, numerous times he particularly takes up this question about protection for Christians and Muslims, specifically in different contexts, minority. Still, he is quite skeptical about the idea of conversion, if I am reading it correctly.
Conversion, I would say, his position was, on the one hand, you're free to convert as freedom through freedom of conscience. It's your constitutional right. You can choose whatever religion you want. But conversion as a sustained political activity was something he was wary of. Now, this rarely arose in the context of foreign missions trying to make conversions. It had happening during colonial times, certainly, in a big way, or big or small, whichever way. He said, if you're going to convert, let Indians convert Indians to whatever it be. That is more or less his position. Let all Indians do it. But why should a foreign institution come and do the job here and try to do it? And if you do so, you're instantly introducing a major international
dimension to the whole thing.
Dimension to it, and another source of conflict to it. And that is when you would have a Hinduism in danger rallying cry come up. But if it was Indians converting Indians, so what?
It is within India.
It doesn't matter.
It's a domestic affair.
That's right.
There's no sort of cross-cutting between religion and nationality in that sense.
That's right. Your nationalism doesn't come up. You don't have to worry about the integrity of India. And always there's a question that if it is a foreigner, they have another dimension to their activity. If you're an Indian who is a Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, Sikh, and wanting to convert others, or Hindu, wanting to convert each other, you are concerned about the domestic situation, and an Indian normally would be committed to the unity of India under, I would say about 99.9%. Not so a foreigner. Foreigner is very breezy about these matters. They say, well, it's a matter of right, of conscience, it is in human rights, self-determination. If somebody wants to be separate, why can't they be, and so on. And they don't take any responsibility for, nor are they concerned about the unity of the country. There's a very major difference in approach between a foreigner and an Indian on these matters. And I think that would apply even if they belong to the same religion. And this is what he was, I think, concerned about.
And he expresses it at various points.
Not so strongly, I think. Not so strongly.
He alludes to those.
He alludes to those, like in his positions on that Michael Scott in Nagaland and so on, and his activities. That's where it came up, the greater salience. That was the issue. What is a foreign missionary doing here? Sort of thing. Because it is like an intrusion from another foreign institutional source in a way that should not have happened.
So at the same time, he's very emphatic that an individual had the choice of belonging or exiting any community.
That he is. That he absolutely is. There's no doubt about it. An individual has to have the choice, and he wants that choice. And this is what he despaired about, caste and religion. They almost don't have the choice. In caste, you don't have the choice at all. Whatever you do, you cannot exit your caste. Religion, at least you can exit. You can join another religion. But what do you do about caste? Unless you do it through some fraudulent means of pretending to be a higher caste than you are, it's almost impossible. And for him, caste was a real stumbling block. What to do about it? And I don't think he finally found an answer.
That remains an open question even today.
Very open, and I don't think anybody has. Because a series of reservations, what does it do? It's constitutionally creating a new caste system.
Right.
More and more reservations, more and more backward, most backward, economically backward, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, God knows. You go on and on about it. Finally, it is another caste system.
So on the question of constitution, now they mentioned constitution. So Nehru, while Nehru is an evolving person himself, so he had the same view of the constitution that he was making, helping build, right?
One thing he was very clear about is the constitution is only a framework within which we work, which we have set ourselves. It is not holy scripture. It is not the Vedas, the Bible, or any such thing. It can be altered freely if the need arises. It should be flexible, and there's nothing solid about it, finally. It's not written in stone. So he wanted that freedom. And initially, he himself said, a simple majority in parliament is enough to amend the constitution. That was his first position. Finally, everybody else said, no, you mustn't treat the constitution like
any other legislation,
Yeah. Therefore, we need greater restrictions, and therefore they imposed this two-third majority and so on. But otherwise, he said, and he took the position, if we have decided things for ourselves in this generation, the next generation should have the same freedom to decide for themselves how they want to govern their country or construct their lives. And this should go on. Everybody should have the freedom. How can you deny somebody else the freedom that you yourself have exercised?
You cannot lock in the future generation to our
lock
vision.
it in at all. And therefore, he would be opposed to the idea of the basic rights doctrine.
Basic structure,
the basic structure doctrine of the Constitution.
So he is inclining towards understanding the Constitution as a living document, an evolving document, which should actually update itself as generations.
Very much so. And he in fact led the first amendment, the famous amendment on property rights and so on. So he had no hesitation to do so. He introduced property rights as a fundamental law, and he himself, fundamental right, and he himself had it amended because he found that it was used, of all things, by zamindars to protect their zamindari rights, whereas that was a core of his entire agricultural program, agrarian program. So he wiped it out and put it into the 9th schedule and so on.
So Nehru is he's a Democrat. You mentioned that earlier. So he is a Democrat, but at the same time, there are certain values that he is willing to fight for, even against a majority opinion railed against him.
He was always doing that.
Right.
He was a Democrat who believed that he must go with the majority, or rather persuade the majority to be with him, either way. And he frequently found himself in the minority. His socialism put him in a minority. And that is the very reason that he never imposed it upon others in any dogmatic fashion, but he was always urging it upon others. Why it was important, what is so attractive about it, and how it will do good to India without endangering so many rights that people imagined. So he was prepared to be in a minority, but always to persuade people to come with him. And they did, because he never imposed it. And when he found that it was a democratic wish to do something, he allowed it and joined it. The most important is the states reorganization, I would say, which showed his evolving respect for this logic of the reorganization of states, when he found the majorities wanted it, and the majorities, having wanted it, actually consolidated the Indian Union better than it would have been had he pursued his initial preferences.
When he talks about a socialist pattern of society, what did he actually mean?
By socialism, he understood a society where equality is given a value preference. Not that you impose equality. No. He said that is absurd. But it is a value preference. You reduce inequalities and all that comes with it. You seek to pursue it. He meant equality of opportunity more than just equality. If everybody is given an equal opportunities, whatever their natural inequalities that they are born with will be contained or controlled thanks to equality of opportunity. More than that we can never do, was his position. And at the same time, he said, we must provide for welfare. It should be a society that is oriented to the welfare of not only the poor, but the whole country, in fact. It should be a welfare society. And in order to do so, the state has to take the leadership in directing the economy. Hence, planning followed. But the state being in leadership is essential to allow for keeping equality as a beacon and ensuring welfare and ensuring a pattern of development which will contribute to both in these ways. And one of his models was actually the welfare society, the welfare state in England and in France and so on that came up after the war. That is more or less the model he followed. And what he did see from his experience of the Second World War is that the state can take the leadership and an enlightened leadership in carrying it out. And they did. That is the lesson we see from the post-war European states. It was the states that took the leadership. And they achieved something wonderful in that the welfare states are one of the major achievements of European civilization that they can justly be proud of, but which they're busy dismantling now, whatever it be. But in the time it worked well, it did achieve enormous results.
So, Professor, the Nehru was obviously, evidently, a pacifist. He was an anti-war person. That is being that fact is being used to argue that he ignored military and India's defense preparedness. How true is that, and what do we know about that aspect from his own approach?
He was opposed to the idea of war because by war he understood total war. He's been through both the wars, First World War and Second World War, and he's seen the horror of both. And for him, war meant that. And the third war he had in mind and dreaded most of all was the nuclear war. So war meant not what we seem to think, that it is a skirmish on the Himalayan frontier or the Kashmir frontier, the Bangladesh or something. That is all we have known in India as war. We don't know what total war is. India is one of the exceptions in the world as a major country which has not known total war. The whole of Europe has, Russia has, China has, Japan has, Vietnam has, the Middle East has. The United States, not really, but even that mobilized for a total war. So we don't know what a war is. And Nehru reminded people regularly, you don't know what war is. When he said war, this is what he meant, the totality of it. And his pacifism derives from that. He said, we don't want this war because India is not going to fight it. But he said sometimes, I wish I wish India had a war. Then we would have strengthened ourselves. Much of the encrustations of unnecessary tradition would have been swept away, which is what happened in Europe. War is very revolutionizing. All these hierarchies and so on begin to vanish a lot. And the welfare society and so on in Europe is possible because the war just destroyed all the earlier structures. So they all escaped it, were saved from it. But India has not. So he would say that. On the other hand, he said, we have to defend ourselves. He took that for granted. It's all nonsense to say that he didn't think of it. From the 1920s, he was saying, we need an army, a modern army, which is a critique of the British colonial army in India, which is only fighting tribals and domestic population and so on. It is not fighting another state. So for the future India, we need a modern army, which is capable of fighting. And thirdly, if you have an army and if you're preparing for war, you have to have an industry or an economy that can sustain a war. He said all wars are sustained by the capacity of your economy. It's not just a matter of fighting. In order to fight, you need
material resources. Yeah.
Therefore, invest in the economy, invest in growth, development. Then you can feed your military machine. For that reason, he was completely aware of the necessities of the war and what is required for the war. Something that all the warmongers were never aware of, never understood. And even the military people never understood their dependence upon the economy. They just thought it was a matter of building up military might and nothing more. And he was always positive towards the defense forces and the army. It is one of the folklores of this country, especially in the defense forces, that Nehru is hostile to them or neglected them and so on. He never did. It is all that I've read, and now I can say with some certainty.
Yes, after having read 75,000 pages. Yeah.
I have not yet found a single negative comment by him against the army and the armed forces. Not even in colonial times, when the army was really being used for the worst purposes, namely to fight for the British Empire and conquer other territories. Even then he did not say so. He always talked of the bravery of our soldiers, the excellence of our armies. He always commended the work, and he always said, we need a modern army and we need an economy that can sustain it. This was his principal points.
Well, I think we will conclude with the last question. I think I'll go back to that question about Nehru and faith and rationalism. So I will read out from one of those. This is Nehru in 1961, towards the end of his life. He is reported by R.K. Karanjia, who was editor of Blitz, who possibly recorded this interview with Nehru, in which Nehru says about how he has changed about questions of spirituality and faith. Quote opens, yes, I have changed. The emphasis on ethical and spiritual solutions is not unconscious. It is deliberate. I believe the human mind is hungry for something deeper in terms of moral and spiritual development, without which all the material advance may not be worthwhile. The old Hindu idea that there is divine essence in the world and that every individual possesses something of it and can develop it appeals to me. This is Nehru in 1961. In 1962, he is asking Radhakrishnan to write a small book about Hinduism, say about 100 pages, especially for the Islamic countries. He's writing to Radhakrishnan. Now, so you have mentioned elsewhere, Nehru was a little uncomfortable with the dogma which reason and rationality have come to acquire, a dogmatic status. And he, in fact, suggests a counter to that in tradition and spirituality. Could you explain that reading of Nehru?
Well, I think this kind of a quotation and what Karanja says of him, Nehru did not bother to brush him off. But as early as the 1920s, before he became a socialist and so on, although he was then a Fabian socialist, Muhammad Ali actually accused him or said, I think you're one of the most religious chaps I know. I don't know the exact quotation. I forget.
This is Jinnah telling Nehru.
No. Muhammad Ali of the
okay, Ali brothers. Okay.
And Nehru said, perhaps I was. So he said, I think you're very religious. And Nehru admits, yes, perhaps I was. He left it open. And throughout, whenever he writes about Buddhism and people of that kind, he's always valorizing the ethics of Buddhism. That is the most attractive. And without an ethical foundation to our lives, we cannot function. We need it. And he considered that Hinduism received Buddhist ethics as its bequest, as Buddhism receded from India. So within Hinduism, you have a powerful Buddhist
influence,
sediment of ethics, not the religious practices. That's not what interested him. So he was always oriented to a moral code. Without a moral code, you cannot live. And you need an ethics that is a rational justification for that moral code. All that is part of his makeup. And he found it eminently present in Gandhi, whom he worshipped. And as I said earlier, he said, for that reason, we have to live for a purpose, for a great cause. The great cause can be anything, but it must completely absorb us. And that is what people so often call religious. That is a religious feeling, being immersed in a great cause. Gandhi is a good example of that. He referred to Romain Rolland that way. And he said, I'm happy to be in the company of all those people who were immersed in a great cause. I'm happy to be counted amongst them. Vivekananda, he mentioned specifically. So he was open to religious feeling, always, but not to religious institutions and to dogma. That is the only difference. And towards the end of his life, when they said, oh, he's getting more spiritual, I think it is that they are referring to some of his pronouncements on these subjects at that time. One of them being that he found Vinoba Bhave a great spiritual leader. Now, throughout his life, he had Gandhi as that kind of a spiritual mentor who provided a moral guidance to the country, which every society needs. When Gandhi gone, in a way, Vinoba replaced him at a smaller level, at a lower level. And it took him some time to take on Vinoba in that role, ascribed that role to him. But he did. And he went out of his way to accord Vinoba a status of a spiritual guru of some kind. And I think it is that approach which these people are noticing and they are commenting upon. But otherwise, I think he had an openness to religious feeling always, but refused to accept a religious dogma and its organization.
And that he could place that quite well within the realm of rationality and science. And
he could. The reason is, he said what he meant usually by science, is the scientific method. That is, whatever you do, you must have evidence to support your case. And whatever claim you make, there must be evidence. This applies not only in science, but in the humanities and the social sciences as much. So to him, science was not the schoolboy's understanding of science, not physics, chemistry, etc. It was knowledge. exactly as the word they use in all of Europe. Only in England they don't. But right across Europe they do. And even in England, they say social sciences. Why? And the human sciences now. The word science means knowledge. Knowledge arrived at rationally, which you can support with evidence. You can't just make wild statements. Bring up an evidence and bring up the logic which sustains it. Then that is scientific. That is the scientific method he always proposed. Not engineering and medicine and so on. That is not the issue. But that is how he's represented now, unfortunately. But as he always said, that only allows us to discover things. Science enables you to discover by these methods, expand your horizons of knowledge. But there's an area which is beyond discovery of reality. That is the world that you create. That is the artist. It is the artist who creates. A poem is not written by science, by any scientific method. Music is not produced by scientific method. You can't even hit a six in cricket by the scientific method. You can't know beforehand that you're going to get it. So art is always something superior and different. And every scientific endeavor he saw has its limitation within reason. But you have to go beyond reason. And he quoted Pascal about it, if you recall in his autobiography. And he sometimes called it the fourth dimension, and so on. This is the artist's insight. Sometimes you can call it the religious insight. You can call it the insight of the mystic. See, he understood all these realms of experience, knowledge, insight, inspiration. And when he called something the scientific temper, he didn't mean the scientific method. He included it, but he meant something beyond that. That is the artistic temper. Really, scientific temper, in his words, meant artistic temper. That is the pure creative human being. That is the human being he idealized, who is creative. Below that is the scientific. But he distinguished between the two. And he allowed the word scientific temper to be used for both levels. But he had two levels in mind, very clearly.
All right, Professor, thank you for this fascinating conversation. So as we conclude, if somebody who is interested in knowing Jawaharlal Nehru on a particular topic, how should they approach this Nehru archive and figure out, for let us say I want to know about Nehru and science or Nehru and Hinduism, what should I do on that website?
Enter the keyword.
Right.
And then spend half a year reading about it.
Or you can figure out Nehru for yourself by...
You have to do an enormous amount of reading, certainly, because a lot of his ideas are contained in his speeches. Because his actual letters, most of them are policy letters. So they won't contain so much. But it's in his speeches that he expanded, put out all his ideas. And so many of those ideas are derived from his books. Many of these are scattered around in the glimpses and the discovery of India and the autobiography and so on. But he expanded further in this. But the reading of the speeches is sometimes trying because they're not set out with the crystal clarity of an exposition that you want.
The reflections as he...
And he just keeps on developing it and he reflects and he's long-winded. Nehru is not succinct. Unlike Subhash Chandra Bose, who was very succinct. But for that reason, Subhash Chandra Bose is also more limited. He is a good examinee, writes very well and very precise. Nehru would not be a good examinee. He would not get high marks because he's too convoluted. He goes around and round the point. But you can see he has a clear idea about it. But he also sees all the objections to those ideas, the difficulties of it, the contradictions around it. And he expresses them and hedges, always qualifies every one of them. So you'd have to read those speeches, which can be quite a long effort. But rewarding, I would say. Many people just avoid reading the speeches. But one of the good things about the website is now all the speeches are there readable. When they were in the archive, they were almost unreadable because they're in terrible typescript and not edited. Now we've gone through the labor of editing it and making it readable and comprehensible with footnotes.
And searchable.
And now searchable.
And going by tag words, right?
So if you're prepared to just read 30 pages for one speech, and read another 20 speeches, you'll certainly get a lot.
Right. Thank you, Professor Palat, for finding time, and many congratulations for completing such an
Thank you very much.
expansive, fantastic project. Thank you.
Okay.